right, so this is the very first card that we're going to work on. So we've got a glittered poinsettia that is also colored. Now before we even start to work on this, there's a few things that you're going to need to have. Obviously texture paste, a palette knife. Towards my side I have a dish with water. As soon as I'm done with my stencil, I put it into the water so that I can work on the technique on my card without this paste drying on my stencil. Very important. It makes it a lot harder to get the paste off your stencil if it started drying. And by putting it in the water, it starts to dilute the paste that's on there, and it kind of does half the work for you. So it just makes your job a little bit easier. So I also have a stencil here. Majority of the cards that we're going to make in this course have stencils, or we're going to be using stencils. So in order to keep your stencil in place without needing to hold it constantly, I'm going to use some temporary tape. So this is just a post-it note tape. You could use washi, you could use die cutting tape, you could use like painter's tape from the hardware store, but you want to tape your paper down and tape your stencil down. And I tape my stencil down where it's not touching the paper, so that when I have put my paste down, I can lift my stencil up this way to remove it. The reason I do that is because then if for some reason I lose my hold on my stencil and it falls down, it falls in exactly the same place, so I'm not going to ruin the front of my card. So then when I take it off, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to pull it off like that, and then I just pull the tape off and put it into the wet, or my tray that's on the side there. So I've got my texture paste. This is a new thing of texture paste, so it's quite full. You'll notice as you start using your texture paste, you can get some dried little bits on there. If that happens, you can use a little bit of water or a little bit of just dress refresher to start softening those bits, and then mix them in. It does get to the point where there's some lumps that you just can't get out of there. I still keep the old paste that has a little bit of lumps in it, and I use it for snow texture and that sort of thing on different projects. So don't necessarily throw that away, but just be aware. I labeled mine with Sharpie that you can't really see, but that way, yeah, that stuff is not good for stencils because there's just too many lumps. So what I'm going to do is take a generous amount on my palette knife here. If you're more comfortable, you could tape this off here, but I'm just going to work this way so that I know I'm not going to get texture paste on that part of the card. And I'm pushing down, and by down I don't mean towards the bottom of the card, I mean down onto the paper, so that that texture paste is filling the areas of those stencils, of that stencil. And I'm going to get a nice thick coat here. Before I remove my stencil, I'm going to take my palette knife and I'm just going to thin that coat. You want to see the image from your stencil so that you don't have too thick of a coat. There we go. Put the paste right back in your jar and then close it up so that it doesn't dry while you're doing the rest. This I'll typically put in my tray of water as well so that it doesn't dry out. Lift my stencil up, and I've got a perfect poinsettia image here. Take this tape off, and sometimes you can reuse the tape, sometimes you can't. So I've got my image here, and in order to glitter it, we're going to do this while it's still wet so that the paste will hold the glitter. So I've got a scrap piece of paper underneath here. Whoops. Cover it with glitter. Tap the excess off, and then pour my excess glitter back in the container. And then I need to let this dry completely. It has to be 100% dry. We are going to apply color to the front of this. Now, I could have colored the actual paste. I would have had to do it, say, on a surface. You don't want to do it inside the jar. Mica powders are not going to change the consistency of the paste. If you use some liquid re-inkers dye or whatever to color it, you just need to be sure you don't add too much because it will thin the paste out and you don't want to change your consistency. All right, so we're going to let that dry. While it's drying, I am going to completely wash and dry my stencil as well as my palette knife because I'm going to be needing the stencil in a bit. All right, my paste is completely dry. I'm going to tape this down again, Now I'm going to take my stencil and I'm going to match it up on the paste, and we're going to use that in order to color our surface. For this particular one, I'm going to put a piece of tape there too, just so I don't accidentally get some ink onto the white part of the card. So all I'm using is distress ink pads and blending brushes here. And by putting that stencil over top, I don't need to be too careful of getting my ink color onto the rest of the card. It's just going to stay exactly where the paste is. So this is a simple and easy trick that will ensure you don't accidentally put paste on the lower part of your card and lose your image. And you're just going to keep building the color up. I just have 3 colors here. You could absolutely use more colors if you want a little bit more depth. You could use smaller blending brushes if you want to get a little bit more detail. For this particular image though, I didn't necessarily feel like I needed a lot of detail. I think pretty much everyone knows what the image is, so there we go. Simple as that. Take my tape off here. Now this particular one, when I lift it up, I don't necessarily need to worry about it falling down because it's not going to ruin anything if it falls in the wrong place. But I'm going to take that, I'm going to put that in my tray of water. This will just wipe right off, so I don't need to worry about it drying. But by putting it in my tray of water, it is going to be half clean by the time I get to it. So there's my image paste, and I'm simply going to put that onto the front of a card and just add a sentiment to it, and my card is completely done. We'll see you in the next video.